All right, everyone, we're going to get started. Thanks so much for being patient with us as we had some technical difficulties. I'd like to welcome you to our Road to HIPAA Compliance webinar series. Today we're going to be talking about the NIST Cybersecurity Framework and how it can be used to protect PHI. We want to go over a couple things before we dive into our discussion today. This session is being recorded, and all attendees will be receiving a link to the recording, as well as a copy of the slides following the presentation. Everyone will also be receiving a CCV Continuing Education Credit Certificate for their attendance today. All attendees will be muted throughout the session, but we do encourage you to ask questions throughout the Q&A feature, which is located on the WebEx toolbar. We will monitor those throughout the hour, and we'll have some time reserved at the end to answer those questions. Patrick Price is a PCI qualified security assessor and a licensed CPA firm providing assurance services to clients worldwide. The firm has over 11 years of experience in information assurance by performing assessments, audits, and tests that strengthen information security and compliance controls. We offer both regulatory compliance and information security services. We provide consulting services such as policy and procedure drafting, risk assessment, internal audit plan and development, and readiness audits. We also provide guidance and audit services on frameworks such as HIPAA, SSAE 16, SOC 2, PCI DSS, FISMA, and ISO 27001 and 27002. We also want to encourage you to connect with us. You can subscribe to our blog or check out our library of recorded webinars if you want to catch up on any of our series. We're also on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook if you want to connect with us on those platforms to keep yourself updated. And that's all I have for you, so I'm going to turn it over to our speaker today, Joseph Fitzpatrick.
All right, thank you very much, Jenna. And we do always want to start out with our legal disclaimer, which is that this presentation today is for educational and informational purposes only, and this does not constitute legal advice. There's no attorney-client relationship established by viewing this presentation, and if you do need legal advice, you should consult your own attorney. And today, what we want to talk about is the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. And I want to start off with just kind of the state of cybersecurity. It's a fast-moving issue today, as many people feel, and I know I feel this way at times, and I am in the cybersecurity field. You know, it's overwhelming, the number of changes, the number of threats, the persistent nature of those threats. It's a very dangerous time when it comes to cybersecurity. You know, we're living in a day and age where we're hearing about breaches every day. There are not only international threats where we have state actors trying to hack into our systems and our information for national security purposes, but there are also opportunists and people making political statements. It's just really a crazy time when it comes to cybersecurity issues. And I wanted to start out by saying it's okay to feel overwhelmed by that and realize that none of us can possibly know everything about all of these issues, and none of us can possibly be ready to defend against every particular threat that's out there. There are people who are solely focused on harm or stealing information or what have you, and so we're all vulnerable. Vulnerabilities exist, and it's very difficult to keep up with those things. But even though we're able to acknowledge that we are in a difficult time and we're facing all those things, we don't have to sit back and just say, oh, well, and there's nothing I can do about it, and so let's just be, you know, a sitting target. We need to do something to prepare and get better and defend. And I think that the cybersecurity framework is one way for us to start to get our arms around this. And it's just true that most healthcare organizations today do not have the expertise to deal with these matters, and really no one does. It's not just the healthcare industry. A lot of organizations are struggling with this topic. And so the main idea that I want to get across today is that learning about the NIST cybersecurity framework is a way to start having a language and a method to understanding what the issues are and how your organization should deal with it. And I also want to say that in healthcare especially, when we're working with clients, I still see in that industry a lot of disconnect between compliance and IT, management and IT, and security and IT. There are walls there. And one of the things that I want to appeal to this group about is that healthcare organizations really need individuals to step up and say, I'm willing to be the person in our organization who's going to start directing some of these cybersecurity issues. And you don't have to be a cybersecurity expert to do that. You really have to be a good communicator. And this presentation was delivered last week at the HIPAA convention, and their theme for the year was Inspire Big Thinking to Launch Our Future. And one of the things that I said to them was, this is my vision for the future. I believe that in 5 years, everyone in an organization will understand the language of cybersecurity and will be involved to some degree in the cybersecurity conversation in their organizations. Most people today, when you ask them about these issues, they say, oh, that's IT. IT handles that. That's not my issue. I don't understand it. Somebody else does. And these organizations are in desperate need of someone to go to management and say, I can help our organization start to talk about cybersecurity issues. And it's really not a technical need that is needed in our companies. It's really a communication need. It's an information management need. The HIPAA organization is focused on professionals in the information management field, and that's really what cybersecurity is. It's information management. How do we know what the threats are? How do we know what our internal capabilities are, and how do we start addressing some of these issues? And before I really dive into the presentation, I want to tell a story about one of our customers that has done a great job with this. And this customer had a compliance officer, and the compliance officer was responsible for all the audits that took place. And so we would come in and do audits for them. They would have clients that would come in and do audits for them, and they were starting to handle 50-plus audits a year, and it really was out of control. And I got a phone call from that compliance officer one day who said, I'm having a nervous breakdown, and I'm leaving the company. I can't handle this anymore. And I wasn't exactly sure if he was being straight about that or not. But a few days later, I got a call from the CEO of that company, and he said, Joseph, I need your help because I can't get in touch with our compliance officer. He didn't show up to work, and I don't know where he is, and he's just gone. And I told him, I was like, well, he actually called me and told me he was having a nervous breakdown and that he was leaving. And so that's the way that person's employment ended at that company. And so I went up there to assist and to try to help them with a client audit that was taking place. And shortly after that, the CEO told me that he had hired or promoted someone, I should say, from customer service to be their compliance officer. And I thought to myself, when this happened, this is a disaster waiting to happen. This person is not trained, not educated in this field. There's no way that this is going to be successful. What does someone from customer service know about compliance and all of these cybersecurity issues and all of these audit requirements that we have going on? And started working with her, and she did and is continuing to do a tremendous job. And the audits at that company just started working much better, and all of the compliance requirements were being met, and evidence was being produced. And so I sat her down one day and I said, I need to ask you a question. Why are you doing so well at this? What is your background? And she said, well, I have a degree in biology, and I worked for a home health organization. And when I worked for that organization, we had been fined by Medicaid, they had been fined by because of a Medicaid overpayment that was in the neighborhood of $384,000. And the owner of the home health organization thought that the office administrator was doing all the billing correctly and all that, and she wasn't. And so when they got fined, he said to her, hey, I need you to work on this. And so the way she tackled the problem was she started looking at, what were the issues that were found that caused us to be in violation? Were they valid? Why did they occur? What needs to be done in order to, address it now, but also what needs to be done to prevent it in the future. And so she just really managed the process. She didn't fully understand all the issues that were involved, but she was the one directing and leading the conversation about what happened, why did it happen, and what do we need to do to prevent this in the future. And so when she got into this compliance officer role, that's really all that she started doing. She started looking at what are the requirements, what are we missing, and what do we need to change. And so even though she couldn't answer the technical questions, the information security questions, she knew who in the organization could do that. And so she was good at going and getting the answer and setting expectations and bringing that back and aggregating the information and communicating it to management, letting them know where they were, communicating it with the clients or the auditors, and really just making sure that everything continues to move forward. And as a result, even though she's not a cybersecurity expert, she is directing and leading the conversation on cybersecurity issues in her organization, and she's a very valuable person within that company now because of her ability to do that. And that's what healthcare organizations really are desperately looking for today. If you go to the powers that be in your organization and you say, I volunteer to be the person here that's going to start addressing some of these issues and leading the conversations, I would bet that they would take you up on it and give you that additional responsibility and let you help, which would help you in your career and in your place in the company, because they are desperately looking for people who are good at doing that. And I think that the NIST cybersecurity framework is one way that we can start doing that. So let me start breaking this down for you. First of all, the framework provides a common taxonomy and mechanism for organizations to, and notice here that this is all about communication, describe your current cybersecurity posture, describe the target state for cybersecurity. Where do you want to be in a year, in 2 years? Identify and prioritize opportunities for improvement, assess progress toward the target state, and communicate among internal and external stakeholders about cybersecurity risk. That's what this framework is all about, is information management. It's about being able to describe where you are, where you want to be, identifying where you need to improve, start to assess your progress, and communicate that along the way to internal and external stakeholders. And so that's really what the framework is all about, and it's something that I believe any of us can do as we work in this field. And all of these things that I'm sharing today in the presentation, they are direct quotes from the framework. And so there's a sentence in there that says, the framework provides a common language for understanding, managing, and expressing cybersecurity risk, both internally and externally. That's where I feel that most people are missing the boat in facing the cybersecurity challenges head on. They're not in a place where they can express where they are. What is our risk? What is it that we're doing about that risk? And where are we trying to get in the future in order to address these risks. It really takes somebody being the central figure to understand those issues, pull the team together, and express that so that everybody in the organization can learn and understand about what's going on. The framework, let's see here, I've lost my, there we go. The framework consists of 3 parts, and this is what we're going to walk through today. I want to show you how to use this in your organization. There's the framework core, there are framework implementation tiers, and then there are framework profiles. And I'm going to show you what the core looks like. If you ever go and download the NIST Cybersecurity framework, which is available online for you to download, you'll be able to see a grid that they have in there. And this grid will be kind of the map that you'll use in order to stay on top of this. And so in the core, we've got 4 elements there. We've got functions, we've got categories, subcategories, and information references. And Jenna, if you would, go ahead and go to the screen that has the grid on there. There we go, because I want you to have the visual of this. These are the 5 things that we want to talk about first, the 5 functions. And again, I don't care what your experience level is. I don't care what your education is, what your background is. Any of us can look at this and say, what are the threats or the risks that we need to identify? You know, how do we do that in our organizations? How do we identify the risks? Well, we perform a risk analysis, right? That's one way to do it, just to give an example. I think most people know that. I think that's common sense. We have to be able to identify it somehow, and so we need to pull people into the room from different departments and functions within our organization, and we need to talk about, you know, what those risks are, what those threats are. We need to begin to identify by taking an inventory. You know, what type of systems do we have here? What kind of servers? What type of software? You know who has the answers to those questions. You can pull those people in and start to identify what the risks are. Then we have protect. We know what that means. You know, how do we protect our physical offices? Well, we protect them with locks. We protect them with security guards, badges, access cards to get in and out of facilities and track who has access to those things. That's the way we protect physical things. What about administratively? You know, what does the HIPAA security rule say? It says that we implement administrative controls. Well, we have policies and procedures that tell our employees the do's and don'ts of what their behavior should be in the workplace. And then what about technical risks? How do we protect against technical things? Well, we do technical things like passwords and patch management and network monitoring and encryption. You know, these are all things that we all understand and can have a conversation in our offices about, you know, how are we protecting these assets that we have in our company. And then the third function is detect. How do we detect when something is going on? Well, is someone reviewing the video camera footage from who went into secure areas? Do we have software that's giving us alerts from our firewall and from other electronic resources in order to give us a notification that maybe something is wrong? You know, are logs present in order to be able to detect when something is happening? What about respond? What does respond mean? We all know what that is. We have an incident response team. We have people who are trained to look at an incident and determine, what do we need to do about this? We have a server that has been compromised. We need to back it up and preserve the evidence and disconnect it from the network. We're going to respond when something is happening during some type of an attack. And then the last one is recover, which is our disaster recovery plan, our business continuity plan. You know, what do we do after the fact? Do we have procedures to restore from backups? Do we have a plan to, you know, learn from what happened and implement it into our procedures next time so that it won't happen again? So these are the 5 areas, and I truly believe that anyone is capable of talking about these things now, and I believe that, as I said, in 5 years, everyone will have a seat at the table to talk about their role in cybersecurity, and they'll understand these 5 functions. So this is the core here, and let's move on to the next slide there, Jim. We'll talk a little bit about, let's move on, identify. I want to talk about each one of the functions just a little bit more, just so you can see on the screen here what each one of them does. Let's go to identify, and I'll show you a few more things. You know, it's always a great idea to do an asset inventory. What are our assets? Buildings, people, places, and the things in our companies, the servers, the software inventory, the data, where is the data located, how do we use those things, and, you know, what kind of processes exist. All of those things are assets. They're intangible and they're tangible. Let's go to protect. When we talk about protect, we go right to the HIPAA security rule and we say, okay, we're looking for administrative controls, we're looking for physical and technical controls. Let's go to detect. And I mentioned logs before, making sure that you have those logs present so that the detection can be there, making sure that alarms and alerts are set up, that there are reports that people can see. I know that's one of the most common findings that we have when we do one of our audits, and that is that people have this fancy network monitoring system, or they have all of these logs, but no one's looking at it. It's not meaningful data. No one is using it in order to do the next thing, which is respond. And so that's something important to look at to make sure that you know how to use your logs to use them for the purpose for which they're intended. Let's look at recover. This is incident response. This is I'm sorry, I meant to say respond. This is incident response. This is training. This is communications with authorities. One of the things that we try to help our clients with is to make sure that you know what authorities you're going to reach out to in what kind of incident. Because there are some types of incidents that are federal. You would go to the FBI because they would have jurisdiction over that. And then there are other things where you might go to the local police or to the state police. You know, I've learned in my jurisdiction where I am that, and this is just my opinion, just from my own assessment of the local authorities, but the state police are the best resource. They're the best trained in my region of the country. You know, they're the ones who, even though the city police might have jurisdiction over it, they're not as up on the you know, breach issues that the state police are. And so learning that ahead of time so that when you're in a situation, you're not having to call and, you know, figure out who to talk to. That's a very important thing to use for preparation in responding. And then lastly, in recover, this is our DR plan. This is where we implement our lessons learned, and this is where we have crisis communication procedures. It's very important as part of your training with your workforce to make sure that they understand who is responsible for talking to the media. They also need to understand what they're allowed to post on social media and not to post on social media. If there's some type of an incident going on, you don't want someone live tweeting about the incident and talking about how well or unprepared you are. And so these are things to make sure that you implement in the recovery stage so that the right people are controlling the messages with the authorities and with the media and with your clients to make sure that the information is dispersed correctly. So those are the 5 functions, and those are the beginning pieces of language that you need to understand and you need to be able to talk about in order to have this cybersecurity conversation according to the way this framework looks at it. Okay, so now let's go to some of the categories. And the categories are subdivisions of a function. And you start to group particular activities, within the function. So I gave the example here of in the identity function, we're going to perform an inventory of all of our systems that require access controls. What do we have? Because people very quickly think about servers and PCs and laptops, but what about mobile devices? What about wearable technology? What about medical devices that are in the facility? What about IP phones? Getting all of those things identified in some type of a category. And so then we'll go to subcategories. Within those categories, you start to break down into other things within that. And first, on this screen, I just pulled a picture from the cybersecurity framework just to show you how they break it down by function. And, one of the things that I'll say about this is the entire list of categories right here. And so it's only 10, 14, 15, 21 different categories. And that's what I like about walking through this with clients, because it's not an overwhelming number of things. It's something that you could learn. It's something you could even memorize. You could remember when you hear awareness and training that, oh yeah, that's one of the categories in the framework. Getting familiar with what it's called, what we're talking about here. And so one of the things that I try to encourage people to do is we're not going to work on all 21 of these today, maybe not even this year. But let's start to work on some of them, and when I show you the subcategories, it'll help you start to get deeper. But think of it like a marketplace. You go into the market and you say, well, I'm here to get some eggs and milk and cheese. That's what I'm here for today. Maybe the next time I'll come back for the cookies and some flour and some Coke. But right now I'm only working on these other things. And so that's what you do with this framework. You use this language to say with your team, what are we talking about today? Are we talking about detection processes? Okay, let's pull up those subcategories and let's talk about detection processes. This is very helpful too when you are a non-IT person and you have to talk to someone who uses different language from you in their day-to-day work. When an IT person comes in and says, we've got this kind of problem going on and I'm going to have to buy this and we're going to have to do this, and you're not understanding what they're saying, you can go, okay, wait a minute, are we talking about protect right now, or are we talking about detect? Okay, we're talking about detecting things. Okay, good, I'm in that category now. And so are we talking about anomalies and events? Are we talking about security, continuous monitoring, or are we talking about our processes in doing this? And so it's a good way, even if you don't say all of that out loud, it's a good way for you to categorize in your mind which part of the framework are we on right now? What are we talking about? So if you're not a technical person, it's very helpful to go to this as a place to say, well, there's only 21 places for this conversation to be, and which one of these are we doing? So let's look at a subcategory now. So it takes those 21 categories, and now it starts to further divide them into specific things. So now you start looking at, well, what do we need to do to make sure that our servers are requiring authorized credentials? What do we need to do to make sure that remote access is requiring multi-factor authentication? So now it starts to get a little bit more granular, but it's leading you to the best practices to do within this category and then within this subcategory. Let's go to the next slide. And you'll see in the framework, you know, I couldn't show the whole framework today in this webinar because it's a large document and there's a lot of little pieces in it, but you'll see that I'll have a screenshot for you here in a minute, but you'll see that there's an informative reference on the right side of it. And what's awesome about it is if you are dealing with something in the detect category and you're dealing with the security continuous monitoring subcategory, then there are these informative references right next to it that you can just Google, and you can become an expert before the day is over. You'll learn something by just reading the references that are there. It has references to NIST 800-53, ISO, you know, different types of resources that if you just copy and paste the reference and put it into Google, you'll have it right at your fingertips to help you understand what it means to make sure that remote access is managed. So that subcategory down there on the bottom that is in the access control category, which is in the protect function, especially if you're not trained or educated on the best practices for remote access, you think, well, yeah, I want this. I want our remote access to be managed, but what does that mean? What should we do? I need somebody to guide me. I need somebody to show. We just go to the COBIT reference there. We go to the ISA reference. We go to the ISO reference, look those things up, and get some really good informative references for what the best practices are to do that. So that's how you use the functionality of the framework. You start to break it down from function to category to subcategory to now let's get down the weeds a little bit and find some best practices from these authoritative resources about what we need to do and how to do it. So it's very useful in that way. All right, let's talk about the implementation tiers now. There are 4 different tiers, and what you use these for is really to determine what your current state is. Where are we as an organization? You know, I've found that human nature wants you to judge yourself against your peers, you know, and you want to know, are we just a mess? Are we an accident waiting to happen over here, and meanwhile everybody else is in great shape? Or is what we're doing paying off? Is it you know, starting to pay some dividends here with the changes that we're making and the attention that we're putting onto cybersecurity? Are we growing? Are we learning? And I was just visiting with a client yesterday, and the whole security team, this is a large organization, but the whole security team had just come in June. And so a lot of what we were looking at was prior to June, but you could see the difference that starting in June, there was lots of good documentation going on. There was evidence available for the controls that they had put in place. They had good processes for responding to incidents, and they were starting to get their arms around that. And so it was really great to see, you know, that the organization had made a commitment to security, and they had made an investment in some new staff members to come in and be responsible for that. And they've got a great Chief Information Security Officer who has taken the bull by the horns and is leading the charge and is making the changes happen. And so they have gone from probably, I would say they were probably a tier 2 type of organization, and now they're on their way to being a tier 4. And so it just lets you assess for where you are and how you're doing. So let's go through each one of these tiers. Tier 1 is partial. This is where you've got informal procedures. You're very reactive. Something happens and you have to deal with it after the fact because you didn't have any kind of defined process to deal with it ahead of time. The organization is limited in their awareness of risk and cybersecurity issues, and there aren't any processes right now to collaborate with outside entities. So that's the lowest level. It's where a lot of organizations have to start. You have to start somewhere, but you don't want to stay there. But it's important to know if you are there so that you can start working on the framework and start moving up the chain. Tier 2 is where we're going to start having a little better documentation on some of these things. We've put policies in place. I see this in a lot of companies. They have policies, they have procedures, but they're just not implemented yet. They haven't gotten that far with. This is our ideal, and we know what our ideal is, but we're just not there yet in making sure that it's implemented and everybody is doing it. We've provided our staff with the resources to perform their duties. We've gotten them the tools, we've gotten them the training, but maybe, we haven't gotten very mature yet in the use of those things. They're available, but we're not mature in how to use them and our processes around that, and we're not formalized in our capabilities to interact and share information externally. Maybe we know now that, okay, if I have a cybersecurity issue, I'm probably going to have to call the FBI or a forensics type of examiner or somebody like that, but we haven't gotten to the point of actually preparing to do that and having formal procedures for doing that. Tier 3 is where I think most organizations are, and I would ask you as we go through this today to take your own inventory. I would love it if in your comments in the chat window there, if you would just type for us, what tier you feel your organization is at. I would love to use that for future conversations to see how many people are tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. Where do you think the state of your organization is? Because I hope that you're taking an assessment as we're talking through this. Oh yeah, we're a tier 3, and that's repeatable. It's where risk management is a formal function and it's updated regularly. We have identified our risks, we put controls in place to manage those risks, and as things change, we update that, and we know what we're doing in that area. We reflect changes to our business requirements in our organization-wide cybersecurity practices. So this is where I see a lot of organizations falling down quite a bit. Oh yeah, here's our risk assessment over here that we did last year. Okay, but since last year, you've opened new offices, you've hired 15% additional staff, you've acquired new software, you have new vendors, and we didn't change what we were doing based on those new business requirements, those new issues that came into the organization. A tier 3 organization is doing that. Oh, we're opening a new office? Oh, let's do an update to our risk assessment. Let's make sure that we talk about cybersecurity risks before we complete that change. Oh, we're buying some software over here, we're changing a process, let's talk about security and how this is going to impact security in the organization. That's a tier 3 organization. And then finally, the organization understands its dependencies on partners and interacts accordingly. When I was at the conference last week, someone expressed some concern about sharing information with competitors. So I'm a hospital here, and my competitor is the hospital across town. Why would I share with them information about our cybersecurity challenges? And that's because we need to understand that we are in a time now where we have to communicate. We have to work together because we can't know everything that's going on. And wouldn't you want to know if they had just been the victim of a ransomware attack? And wouldn't you want to know how that became successful for the attacker to lure one of their employees to click on a phishing link. Wouldn't that be very valuable information? And so having a mindset that we are in this information security community together and we're going to help each other, we're going to share information because we are dependent on one another in this security ecosystem. And so, you know, giving of our time and our knowledge to help someone else will come back and help us be stronger also. And that's what a Tier 3 organization recognizes and works with. And then Tier 4 is the adaptive level. This is where you would want to be. And so your practices are constantly being adapted based on lessons learned and predictive indicators. So it's a very proactive type of approach. You're ahead of the game. You're looking at the news. You're looking at the reports that are published about what's happening in the cybersecurity world, and you're continuously improving your own process there within your organization. And you do that very quickly. You're on top of it. Your risk management is part of the organizational culture. There's no one in the maintenance staff that hasn't heard about the cybersecurity initiatives and doesn't know who to go report to when there's some kind of concern that's noticed or recognized. And communication and interaction with partners occurs before a cybersecurity event occurs. So we're not just having conversations about what happened with each other, but now we're working together and saying, let's prepare to defend this, this critical infrastructure against the threats that are attacking all of us. So those are the implementation tiers. And like I said, I hope you took an assessment of yourself so that you, in your mind, you go, oh yeah, we're a 2, we're a 4, whatever it is that you're able to do that. Let's go on to the next one there about the profile. And this is where you identify who you are today with your gaps, and you create a roadmap to where you want to be. I think I said something earlier about your target state. The profile is, okay, today we are in this kind of condition. It's your overall profile of where you are. I like to use the example of kind of assessing where we are with our children, you know. I've got 3 kids, and I've got this one really where I want them to be at this moment in time, you know, but I'm behind on this other one. I've got to work on his respectful behavior with elders, and I've got to work on his responsibility with money and all these kinds of things. And so I see what my gaps are. You know, I know what is lacking in my parenting efforts so far with this child, but I want to get him here. And so that's what you do with your profile, and you're able to start articulating. These are our needs to get from point A to point B. We need some additional staff. We need some additional funding. And those are the kinds of things that you think about so that you can, and this is what you take to executive management, right, as the executive summary. They don't want to listen to categories and subcategories and, you know, informative resources. They want to know, where are we, where do we need to be, and why. And putting together a profile to share at an executive summary level is a very helpful way to do that. All right, good. Let's move on to our next section here. And I want to share a few case studies with you before we finish out today. The first one was an ambulance service that we worked with that had a vendor, and we see this so much. There's a vendor who's supplying technology services. And during the risk analysis that we were doing, we came across this rack. It was a locked rack of equipment in there. Well, what's in here? What does it do? Who has access? What kind of software is running on it? The answers were, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. And it was the vendor handles that. The vendor is responsible for that. And we fight this battle sometimes with responsibility. You know, if you contract with somebody to provide systems and services that are going to be connected to your network and your information, you're responsible for that. You can't outsource security. That's always going to be your responsibility. And so we had a conversation with the vendor, and the vendor didn't want to share any information. They didn't want to talk about how they were maintaining it. They didn't want to talk about who had access. They didn't want to share any logs. They didn't want to share any configurations. And they out and out said, we don't have to. So using some of the ideas from this framework, you're able to have a conversation with somebody like that and explain why it's important and what, you know, we're trying to achieve as an organization. And really, before you even get in that situation, you want to make sure in your contracts that you have vendors who understand their security obligations to you, their requirement to participate in audits and provide information when authorities or auditors are coming in and doing that. You don't want to be in a situation where you're in the middle of a breach and you're having to have the argument with a vendor about whether or not they're going to give you a password to log in and do a forensics analysis because of some issue that happened. And so it went pretty well. I think we're still on the way to getting that vendor, you know, fully understanding compliance and what the cybersecurity threats are, and the fact that they are a major risk to our clients. And, you know, some things do have to be vetted. But that's one very common scenario that happens out there that we should be mindful of in working with our vendors. And those are partners. When we talk about the external partners and collaborating with them, that's an example of a partner. Case study number 2, I think, is the example that I gave you before, so I'm going to skip that one. That was the customer service person who was promoted into compliance, and even though she's got a biology background, she's doing a great job with cybersecurity issues because she knows how to communicate. And then finally, case study number 3 was a practice management organization that I was impressed by how proactive they were. I consider them to be a 3 or a 4 implementation tier with this, because as they roll out new products and new software that their doctors' offices and medical centers use in their back office operations, in development, as the product and service is being planned, they are having cybersecurity conversations. They're doing risk analysis. Everybody in the room, when you walk into their conference room and have a meeting with them, they have someone from project management, they have someone from application development, they have someone from IT, security, and management all in the room. And everybody is invested. They understand the importance of security, and they're working together as a team to make sure that the product or the service that they're rolling out doesn't provide any kind of undue risk to the doctor's office that's choosing to use that. So they're talking about it very well, and they are working together very well on cybersecurity, and that's the type of team that you want. That's the kind of communication that you want to have happen. Okay, in our last few minutes, and Jenna, I'll have you just look and see if there are any questions today that we can fit in here before we go. If anybody put a question into the chat window or the questions, the Q&A section there of the WebEx screen, just let me know at the end if there are any that I need to answer today. But I want to tell you about the Baldrige Cybersecurity Excellence Builder. I think it was in July. This was published, and this is a self-assessment tool that provides you with questions based on this NIST cybersecurity framework. And so it's something you can Google and you can download the PDF. There's an associated Excel spreadsheet with this as well to help you in assessing where you are with this framework. But what we offer here is a free account to our NIST audit manager, and we've got a couple of screenshots here to show you. You can get registered by going to NISTauditmanager.com, and if you are not a current user there, you can request an account. And when you do become a user, what you're able to do is you're able to set up different accounts for whoever in your organization is going to participate. So let's say that there are 50 questions in this tool. You may not be the one who's answering all of them, so you can create the compliance officer, you can create the information management supervisor, someone from legal, someone from IT, someone from management. So you can create those users, and then you can assign the questions from the tool to whichever users, and that's on the next screen here. So here's one of the questions: does your organization have a formal, documented, and implemented risk assessment program? And so who needs to answer that in our organization? Is it Claudia? Is it Della? We'll select who that is, and when they get that assignment, when they log in, they will see all the questions on their dashboard that's assigned to them, and they'll be able to walk through that, and everybody can work on their questions together, and the one person who's the facilitator in the tool will be able to see all of the answers and pull all of that together for the team. And then I think there was one more screenshot, wasn't there, Jenna, from here? No, there wasn't. Okay. So with that, were there any questions that anyone submitted today, Jenna?
No, there aren't any questions.
Okay. I'm going to throw one out that I got asked at the conference that I think is good to close with. The person said, do you share the results of your cybersecurity framework efforts with external parties? And after we got into that conversation a little bit, I realized that what they were confusing it with was when you do an audit, let's say, against the HIPAA security rule, we call that a framework too, because the security rule provides very specific requirements for administrative, physical, and technical controls. And that's the kind of information that a third party wants, right? Authorities, regulatory authorities, auditors, clients. They want to see, well, show me that you've done this. And that's what that type of framework is all about, is to document that you have done that. I want to close by emphasizing that this NIST cybersecurity framework is not focused on how do we satisfy a client, how do we satisfy a governmental agency. That's not the purpose of this. The purpose of this is to help the organization implement security practices because it's the right thing to do, and it's something that you're trying to change in your organizational culture, because you don't want a breach. You don't want an incident to go unseen or unchecked. And so you're doing this because you're trying to make your organization better, and that's what this framework is about, rather than trying to accomplish something that checks a box or completes a questionnaire for a client or gets a new contract or whatever. It's not for the purpose of just satisfying and moving on. It's for the purpose of doing the right thing, because it is the right thing to do in this day and age with where we are with the risks. So I just want to thank you for joining us today and talking about this important conversation. If anyone does have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them after the fact. In our next HIPAA compliance series webinar next month, we'll be talking about trends in enforcement activity. We'll be looking at some of the recent fines and orders that have come out and see what the lessons learned are from those, and share that with everybody else. So my contact information here is on the screen. If you have any questions at all, if we can assist in any way, please do not hesitate to reach out to us at kirkpatrickprice.com. Have a great day.